Violence in Kazakhstan. Protesters there have stormed and set fire to government buildings in the country's largest city. The violence there follows days of mass demonstrations over surging fuel prices. And appealing for calm, the country's president today spoke of deaths and injuries sustained in the protests. And he said that he would act forcefully to end the unrest.
Thousands of protesters venting their fury at the government. A rare sight in the authoritarian ex-Soviet republic. For 4 days, these people have been taking to the streets. Protests started in the remote oil hub of Zhanozhen, but they quickly spread to other cities after the government announced an end to price caps on fuel. Now the unrest appears to be spiraling and hitting the country's largest city, Almaty, in particular. Protesters are calling for wider political changes. Police have deployed in numbers in a bid to curb the unrest. But tear gas and stun grenades have done little to dissuade protesters. Neither have hundreds of arrests, nor the imposition of a curfew and movement restrictions on several regions. Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has sacked the government and moved to reinstate price controls in response. But with protests escalating, the president has vowed to hold firm. As the head of state and, from today, the president of the Security Council, I intend to act as tough as possible. No matter what, I will stay in the capital. Kazakhstan's authoritarian government usually tolerates little real opposition. But this time, the protesters' anger seems to have caught the authorities off guard.
And for more now, I'm joined by Ayzarim Talekhanova. She's a freelance journalist. She's currently in Prague. She just arrived there this morning from Kazakhstan. Ayzarim, it's good to have you with us. What are you hearing? What is the latest right now on the situation?
The latest right now I know is that internet connection has been restored in some cities of Kazakhstan. It's been off for around 7 hours. And the people whom I contacted, the sources on the ground, say that it's quite an anarchy on the streets. There is no presence of police or any security forces. And we know that protesters have captured the Almaty airport, have burned down the prosecution office, the city hall of Almaty is still burning, and several state TV offices are also burning. So it's still ongoing, and it's going to develop further.
So, and we've got reports that Tokayev has sacked the government and taken over the country's Security Council. So do we know who is in charge of the country right now?
The head of Security Council used to be Nursultan Nazarbayev, the former president, until 2019. And now Tokayev has stated in his address to the nation that he will now take over this title, which probably means that Nazarbayev may not be in the country or is not able to control the situation. So right now, what we know is that people on the ground say that there is no control over the situation, but Tokayev is appealing to different governments, particularly CSTO, to help Kazakhstan curb this current violent protest.
And Ayzarim, you mentioned former President Nazarbayev. Do we know anything about his whereabouts tonight?
No, we don't know anything about his location or of his family. And we also haven't heard from him in the last few days when the protests were escalating. And it's usually the case when there are protests, Nazarbayev very rarely publicly speaks out about them. And right now we just have heard of Tokayev and probably some other people who are working behind the scenes. But it seems to me that the situation is still very shaky, and Kazakhstan's government does not have enough resources to control the situation on the streets in different parts of the country.
Well, we understand that this started over protests over increasing fuel prices, but how do you explain that in Kazakhstan, a country that sits on some of the world's largest oil reserves?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting note, because the protests have started in the western part of Kazakhstan, which is rich in oil and gas and other natural resources. But this part of Kazakhstan has also seen a lot of inequality. The people there who own oil and gas companies, they don't see the benefits from the natural resources that Kazakhstan is extracting from this part of the country. And I think that for people, it was also a surprise that a gas-rich Kazakhstan would increase prices, given that people's economic situation was already being very dire and very heavy, and many people are still saving money even to buy meat and other products. So I think that the official reason that they were protesting because of the increase in oil or gas prices is just the tip of the iceberg, because there have been many problems accumulating in the last 3 decades that Kazakhstan has to deal with now.
Journalist Ayjarim Toliukhanova joining us tonight with the latest on that situation in Kazakhstan. Ayjarim, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
While tensions in Kazakhstan continue to grow, the world is trying to understand what is behind this unrest. The Central Asian country has escaped the global spotlight for decades. Here's a closer look now at the former Soviet republic's recent history and what the protests tonight could mean for its authoritarian rule.
The gaudy and at times bizarre modernism of Kazakhstan's capital, Nur-Sultan. This Nubarish city recently shed its previous name, Astana, in honor of the man who has ruled the country for 3 decades. Nur-Sultan Nazarbayev led Kazakhstan into independence in 1991 during the collapse of the Soviet Union. He ruled as an autocrat, rigging elections and quashing any opposition. He also tapped Kazakhstan's abundant oil and gas reserves to embark on a course of modernization and economic reform. Nazarbayev stepped down as president in 2019 and installed loyalist Kassym-Jomart Tokayev as his successor. But he retains his power and his official title, leader of the nation. For all the glitzy facades and economic growth, progress remains out of reach for many. According to the World Bank, half the population lives in remote areas with poor infrastructure and widespread poverty. It is in areas like these where the protests over surging fuel prices began. The unrest could finally pry open Nazarbayev's iron grip on the country. President Tokayev has taken over as head of the National Security Council, a position that had concentrated power in the hands of his predecessor.